back to our topic. Social media. Oh my gosh, social media is like one of the least secure things we can do, and yet it is so essential to just basic life these days, including political protests. I gotta say, 10 years ago, I never thought that activists would be posting about social get-togethers or protests or actions on Facebook. That would have horrified me. However, it's just the norm now. But I want you to think about your Facebook page. What information do you give? Is it your full name and your picture? Is it public? Does that public profile like have a lot of friends? Do you know all those friends? Do you know that all those friends, there's no one in there that's fake? No one in there that's actually a cover for somebody looking for information? Who do you follow? Is that public profile associated with following a bunch of like really interesting political things? What do you like? What do you post publicly? There have been, social media is a big tool gathering for political opponents. It definitely has come up. People have used a lot of screenshots of posts in court cases. People have absolutely had worse outcomes in court cases because of the things that they posted on social media. Even something as simple as checking in at a protest, boom, right there. That's going back to the location. Like you just told the police, hey, by the way, I was over here at this protest, which really narrows down their suspect pool, I gotta say. But this is a big tool for political opponents, for, the Proud Boys, the fascists, the whoever, to go and be like, oh, look, this person totally supports these like radical, like anti-police activities, like keep an eye on them, like they're the enemy. So you should absolutely be sharing political things and your political ideas, but be mindful, what are you sharing? Is it incriminating? One of the things I want to share at the end is a link to a thing that someone put together about kind of the ethics of photojournalism. I believe that they did a webinar for 350 Seattle as well, correct me if I'm wrong. That's really wonderful. So photojournalism, both, I think many of us think about like National Geographic, but really applies to even just your basic social media post. Did you go to a protest and take some cool photos and post them online? Were there people's faces in it? Did those people consent to their faces being shared publicly in connection with that protest? Maybe just a little too close to that burnt cop car. Social media has been a huge information gathering campaign for police. Police almost don't even have to take photos at protests anymore. They simply just have to peruse social media afterwards. Police sit in big rooms during protests and look at all the live streams in order to figure out who's committing crimes, in order to figure out what the next tactical move is. Live streaming, taking video, taking photos is a huge issue of security. However, it's also so essential in getting the word out. I think we all really agree that the world would look a lot different if somebody hadn't taken a photo or a video of that cop kneeling on George Floyd's neck. We would not be where we are. We would not have had the public outrage if people did not continue to take and share information about police brutality. However, it is very much a double-edged sword. There have been many people who have lost significant portions of their lives and their freedom to jail time because other people posted on social media. Example, story, Rayshard Brooks, that was down in the South. That was the gentleman who was shot in the back by cops in a Wendy's parking lot. Afterwards, there were some big protests around that Wendy's, including at one point it was burnt down. And on there, or during that time, somebody had taken a video of somebody who appeared to have been throwing what looked like a Molotov cocktail at the Wendy's, which then set it afire. People started posting that video, both as a like, whoa, so cool. Look at that, they fucking burned down Wendy's. But also there was a lot of outrage over the fact that the person who appeared to be burning it down was not a person of color. So people were sharing it widely, being like, what the fuck, look, see, it's totally the white people doing all this. And it got shared so much publicity. That video directly resulted in the arrest of Rayshard Brooks's partner. The person that they're accusing, that people were like, look, it's just like white people doing all of this, was actually one of the people who was closest to that murder and probably had the most reason to be pissed off and upset at the Wendy's that called the cops that resulted in that person's death. And I personally do believe that the people who posted that video and continue to share it are directly responsible for that person's upcoming court case and potential incarceration. So keep that in mind when you're sharing these things. You're like, do I want to be complicit in literally handing people to the state? And how can I share these, atrocities that are going on without jeopardizing the people? So big rant, but ethics of photojournalism, weird, murky gray area, but I'll try to share something later on that will hopefully, for people who are interested in following up on that, can follow up on. So other ways we can look at security, the things we leave behind. I won't talk too much about like physical evidence. I think that we all have seen enough police crime dramas to know about keeping an eye on the evidence that we leave. Say you want to go to a protest with a big banner, and maybe you want to drop that banner off of, a construction site. Sure, a little bit of trespass, not super legal, but pretty low stakes, right? Where do you get those supplies? Are you getting those supplies from the hardware store next to your house where you know the clerk and there's all kinds of cameras everywhere? Are you using your credit card to buy those supplies? After you make the banner, did you leave all of your supplies around the house? Did you put it in the trash? Did you know that what you put in the trash, once you put it out on the curb, that it's public and the police can raid your trash and totally collect evidence from your trash? Do you have a really rare breed of dog that got hair all over that banner? And so when the cops go to investigate that banner, they're like, why is there this weird like dog breed hair all over everything? Oh, look, there's not that many people who own that dog. There goes our suspect pool, pretty small. What do you carry with you? Did you go to a protest and bring your backpack? Does your backpack have your homework in it with your name all over it? Did you put a spray paint can in that backpack? If you lose that backpack, does that backpack with the spray can, with the, with your homework paper with your name all over it together, like, did the police find that? Like, that's up. Talk about like going to protests and black bloc. What we wear is important. There are cameras everywhere, both every camera in every person's hand, but of course also, at the precincts, at every shopping center, everywhere. There's always cameras. They're always watching. Black bloc is a tactic that you used to see or still see, I guess, by like anarchists, but also other groups of showing up to protests or any kind of interesting political action in a uniform, all wearing the same damn thing. Why? Well, it's really hard to target people if you're all wearing black. If you have a crowd of 200 people all dressed in black with their faces covered, it's gonna be really hard to pick out the people who maybe are a little bit rowdier than others. It's going to be hard to pick out who had the banner and who didn't. Good example I believe out of Seattle, there was recently somebody who was arrested because there was a photo shared of that person maybe setting fire to a police car, who was wearing a really unique shirt that she got off of Etsy. And when she bought that shirt, she put a little review up. So that was public with her face saying like, yeah, I love this shirt, it's great. And the police were able to track through that shirt that she was wearing who the person was and was able to arrest them because they were wearing something really identifying. And it could be, again, you're not even committing a crime, but you're simply at a protest and maybe you wear your work uniform. Maybe you don't want your boss knowing that like you're in uniform at that protest. Maybe you don't want the Proud Boys knowing where you work. Whatever it is, being mindful of just the information you just give away for free by what you're wearing. So that was just kind of a lot of like little points I wanted to touch on of like but there's so many more, like where are the places that we're just like throwing out free information, free breadcrumbs for the police or whoever else to be picking up. And how do we always be mindful, not paranoid? Paranoia implies that we're letting things stop us, that we're letting that fear of our information being out there stop us. It's not about that fear stopping us. It's about being aware of our surroundings and conducting ourselves constantly in a way that minimizes the breadcrumbs that we're leaving that will potentially land us in a precarious situation. Next thing I want to talk about is less about the physical things or the technology things, and more about the relationships that we build. Snitches and informants are still a really big problem. Back in the day, they were the biggest problem. They were the biggest form of information gathering. However, these days, part of the reason I talk so much about phones and technology and surveillance is because that's actually really one of the bigger problems. But I still think it's important to talk about snitching and informants. When you get involved in political activities, you're going to have people that are really excited about your ideas. You're going to meet lots of really cool people that maybe you hadn't met before. That's awesome. Make new friends. New friends are wonderful. But be mindful of who you're making friends with. Why are people reaching out to you? You know, what is their intent? What is their story? Who are they? Keep an eye. Informants and infiltrators are still a big deal. So informants are people sent by the state to be the wolf in sheep's clothing, you know, to sneak in, pretend to be one of you and gather information or try to catch you in a crime. Information they gather sometimes is a really big court case, is sometimes some giant big information gathering session that culminates in a big arrest. Sometimes they're just figuring out social networks. They're figuring out who the police should target, who knows who's involved in what. Sometimes it doesn't always erupt into a big thing, but the information they gather is still a problem. Sometimes they're there to disrupt. COINTELPRO is something you'll want to look up later. Was the counter information or counterintelligence information project. Started back, I think, in like the 50s, 60s, used against the Black Panthers and stuff a lot, but it's just generally the kind of government's way of using the intelligence to disrupt political groups, not just through arrest, but through spreading disinformation, through causing drama in groups. Sometimes informants are just there to like fuck shit up. Infiltrators, pretty much informants, but typically that's, they're working for corporations, they're corporations' goons, or more likely they're political opponents. So how do we keep ourselves safe from informants? I mean, first and foremost, it's thinking about all the above stuff, thinking about who you're talking to your political ideas about, who has access to your phone, who has, access to your home, like controlling that information that we talked about, keeping in mind who's on your social media. One of the best ways to kind of curtail informants is to just like not be gossiping and telling secrets all the time. So that even if there is an informant in your midst at any given time, they're not going to find out anything. It's going to be a pretty boring information gathering campaign. So making them kind of irrelevant is the best thing we can do. Secondly, know your people, build trusting relationships, vouch, vet, do background checks. What does that look like? That looks like somebody comes up to you after a meeting and they're like, hey, so nice to meet you. Love your ideas. Let's get coffee later. Like, let's talk politics. And you're like, hi, like, who are you? Like, what's your background? Get to know them. And if they're like, oh, I know so-and-so, don't be afraid to go talk to so-and-so and be like, hey, do you actually know this guy? Like, what's their story? Good, bad, ugly? Find out people's backgrounds. Do they seem to have a background or did they come out of nowhere? Is it somebody who, do you know what high school they went to? Do you know their family? Does their background story make sense? You might have somebody come in and start wanting to do actions with you and they're like, yeah, I was involved in Occupy back in the day. That's where I became radicalized. Think to yourself, like, what friends do I have from Occupy in that town back in the day? Call them up, ask about people. Don't be afraid to really figure out who people are when they want to be involved in your products. You don't have to just let anybody into your spaces, to your ideas, to your projects. No one's entitled to that. If you're having a meeting, vouch people in, meaning you have a meeting, you invite some people you trust, maybe they invite some people they trust, and that's how kind of information gets around. You see somebody there and you're like, hey, I don't know you. And they can be like, hey, I'm, Violet. And you're like, great, like, who do you know? And if 3 people in that room are like, I know Violet, I vouch for them, totally trust them, then you can rest assured, great. All right, other people have already built a trusting relationship with this person, and there should be degrees of trust, right? If you're like, okay, well, I trust this person trusts this person trusts this new person. Okay, how secure do I feel about that? Do I feel pretty good? Great. That's going to make you feel a lot better than me being like, hey, Violet, anybody in the room want to vouch for Violet? And it's all crickets. And you're like, interesting. How does Violet know this meeting's here? Why is Violet at this meeting? Vouch people in. And background check your friends and make that really normal. I'll give an example or a story about that. I moved away for a couple years, but still maintained a lot of really good friendships in the area that I'm from. And when I came to move back, there was this person who was a friend of a friend of a friend from back in the day. We knew each other well enough to have each other's numbers, but hadn't really hung out much. Texted me and was like, yo, I hear you're moving back to this town. There's not a lot of people who are cool in this town. I live there now. I'd love to get coffee with you. So what did I do with that? Rather than just jump straight into it and be like, cool, there's this person, I vaguely know they're connected, I'm gonna trust them right away. No, I knew that I didn't know what had happened in the last several years. I didn't know everyone's story, so I went to some friends and I just did a simple, hey, this person contacted me, what do you think, yay or nay? And across the board, everyone was like, yes, I trust that person. And so when I did get back to that town, I had that opportunity to have a really great friendship with somebody who had been vouched for, and who had already been vetted. And I think that's really wonderful. I still get text messages from people who are like, hey, or I should say signals, or I get secure messages from people who are like, hey, this person said that they're involved in your town 10 years ago, and that, I knew that you were involved at that time. Like, what do you think of this person? And give me the opportunity to be like, yeah, no, back when I knew them, I knew they weren't an informant, I trusted them. Or to be like, no, like, I didn't really know that guy. Like, I don't know who you're talking about. Or like, yeah, that person was super disruptive and like caused a lot of problems. Like, I don't know if you want them around. And have that opportunity to use your social networks to make sure that the people you're involving in your projects and in your life are who they say they are and are people that you want around. And trust your gut. If somebody's as soon as they get in the group, are suddenly agitating for more criminal activity and go harder and, trying to get people really involved in things, like, I don't know, like if it doesn't feel right, trust your gut. I'll give an example. Here's a court case you should read up about. Eric McDavid and Anna. Anna came into town, started kind of snooping around the like activist community. Eric was like, hey girl, like kind of got a crush on you. You're pretty cute. You want to hang out? And she was like, yeah, of course. What are your ideas? Like, how radical are you? Are you tough? Are you cool? And he really wanted to impress her. So he was like, yeah, of course I'm radical. And they talked about interesting political ideas. And they were like, fuck dams. Dams suck. They kill the salmon. They're totally this like, infrastructure that allows for industrialized society, like down with the dams, fuck the dams. And Anna was like, yeah, totally, fuck the dams. So she's like, you know what, like I rented a cabin, let's go up to the cabin together. And he was like, all right. She's like, we've been talking about getting rid of these dams, like I got all these bomb making supplies, like we should totally bomb that dam. And turns out Anna was an informant, and she escalated that situation pretty intensely to the point to which Eric McDavid never actually made a bomb. He never actually blew anything up. No one was ever harmed, but there's enough evidence to convince a jury that he would have, if Anna hadn't been there and hadn't stopped him, that he would have blown up that dam. And that was enough that I think he was convicted of, 15, 20 years in prison, all because he wanted to impress somebody. And this person kept advocating for increasing escalation, increasing illegal activity, and he found himself trapped. So trust your gut. Make new friends, invite new people into your scene, but be on your toes. Know who people are, know why they want to be there. And if if somebody's acting funny, don't mess with them. Alrighty, quick little thing on snitches, and then maybe we'll take a break after this. I've been talking a lot. So snitches are another really big problem. They're harder than informants because informants take a lot of resources and a lot of intent for the state to find somebody who either works for them or who wants to be really involved, to plant themselves, gather that information, all of that. It's so much easier to find somebody who's already in the scene, already knows everyone's secrets, already knows everyone's connections, and turn them, right? That's the easiest. So why do people become snitches? Money. Not so much a thing in the anarchist or activist communities. You see that though, like in mob stories and drug deals. Politics. Brandon Darby is a really interesting case. There's a good This American Life podcast about him, actually. He was an activist for many years, trusted, well-known. He had been vouched for. He had been vetted. People knew him. And as far as we can tell, one day just kind of woke up and decided he was working for the wrong team, and that, all these political activists were actually doing harmful things and needed to be stopped. And he decided to turn snitch and actually actively worked to trap several young kids into pretty lengthy jail sentences, because he just decided that his politics didn't align. Fame. Anna, that story I told you about Eric McDavid blowing up the dam or not blowing up the dam. She was a college student who wanted to get into criminal justice. She wrote her thesis on, if I were to infiltrate an eco-terrorist organization, this is how I would do it. As you can imagine, that caught the FBI's attention. The FBI was like, hey, we got some field work for you. And she was like, wonderful, this is gonna boost my career. This is gonna be great. She did all kinds of stories afterwards. People interviewed her where she was like, yeah, I did that. That was so cool. Look at who I am. Fame. It's the reason people become snitches. Biggest one though, fear. Most people snitch. Most people give the state information on people's political ideas, people's political actions, people's political organization affiliations, whatever, out of fear. They got caught for a crime themselves, maybe, or at least, got crimes pinned on them and are threatened with lengthy prison sentences, or told that, their drugs will be withheld, or, threatened with physical pain, all kinds of things. Fear is the biggest motivator. And I think that's important because we all have fears, right? The police and the state are very much capable of really intense and scary things. I'm not going to ask you to share this with the group, but I want you to later on really meditate. What would it take for you to snitch? Would it take a public expose where your employer and your mom and your school knew your political ideas and looked at you in a bad light? That shame. Would that be enough for you to give up information? Would the threat of jail time, prison time, be enough for you to turn state's witness and to give up, information on political actions you've done, a friend's done, to turn over photos that you have at a protest, to talk about things that you saw at CHOP or Chaz? Would the threat of your children being taken from you be enough for you to wear a wire and talk to somebody about their political ideas? Would it take the threat of violence? Everyone has a limit, right? What would it take for you? I want to give a story about KDO, Maddie, and Matt Duran. Another court case to look up, Seattle grand jury resistors. Side note, grand jury. Grand jury was supposed to be something that protected defendants. It's now used as a tool of the state where you can be subpoenaed to give testimony. You cannot have a lawyer present and you cannot refuse to testify. You can plead the fifth. You can choose to not incriminate yourself. You do not have the right to not incriminate others. These three people, KDO, Matt, and Maddie, were subpoenaed to a grand jury, and they were expected to give testimony on simply stating the political ideas of somebody else in order to create intent, to be able to prove in that grand jury to the judge and to the jury that there is enough evidence of intent to go on with a bigger trial. KDO, Matt, and Maddie were like, nope, we will not give information. We will not talk about other people's political ideas. We will not help you put more people behind bars. Because of that, they were held in what's called civil contempt of court. They were held in prison for 6 months, most of which in solitary confinement. That took some pretty serious political conviction to be able to say, I will go up against indefinite incarceration before I will choose to snitch. But you know what else it took? It took prisoner support. It took people writing them letters saying, yo, I'm proud of you. Keep up the good work. It took people paying their rent. It took people taking care of their dog. It took employers being really understanding. It took friends telling them over and over again that, yeah, they're proud and that like life's going to be okay. You know, it took them knowing that there was a good life to come out to. Prisoner support is security culture. You know, they probably could not have withstood the months of incarceration that they did if they didn't know that everything was going to be okay and people would support them. So the things I want you to meditate on are, what would it take for you to break, and how do you change that the best you can? You know, during that time when people were being subpoenaed for the grand jury, lots of people who were associated with the crime in question, which had to do with fucking shit up at May Day in Seattle that year, or a couple years before, constantly had to be thinking about like, hey, like if I got caught by the police right now, what would my life look like? And how can I organize my life in ways where I'm less likely to give up information out of fear? So also, the more you know about how courts work, about, you know, kind of just knowing your rights and what rights you do have, that is also going to really help you not become a snitch yourself. So that's a really big thing I want you to think about. So what are the signs that somebody's a snitch? Arrest and release. You know, that person is just like made of Teflon. You know, they seem to like, every time they get arrested, they seem to like get out next thing. And when they get out, they've got a change in behavior. They're suddenly asking weird questions. They're suddenly super involved. Projects seem to kind of get sabotaged. Maybe like, you know, every time the person gets released, suddenly like everyone else seems to end up with court cases. Every time that, you know, person comes around, the police just seem to know your political organization's next move. Like, what's going on? You know, track those things. But if you think somebody's a snitch, always have evidence. Don't just go around being like, I think that person's a snitch. That's called snitch jacketing. It is a very disruptive behavior. Have information, gather information, have the court documents with their name on it saying that, yes, they turned state witness. Talk with some trusted people, see what they think, see what information they have to gather. And then if you think somebody in your organization is a snitch, is an informant, is otherwise an unsafe and unsecure person, get them out of your life. Don't talk to them. Sometimes you can choose to confront them, but it's usually best not to confront them. Simply make them irrelevant and make them go away. So kind of back to some basics, some 101s. Do projects with trusted friends. Don't be a snitch. Figure out what it's going to take for you to not be a snitch. Use secure forms of communication. One thing I haven't talked about much, but is don't gossip and don't brag. It is like you do not want to, again, I'm just going to keep using protests, but say you went to a protest and you want to go home and you want to brag about it and you want to be like, man, it was so cool. I like jumped on top of that cop car and I felt like I was on top of the world. Don't brag. You know, if you just have to share that information, share it with a few very trusted people. Don't post on social media how much fun it was to smash up that cop car. And more importantly, don't gossip about other people's information. Don't go home and talk to all your roommates about like, man, I saw Susie smash out that cop car. It was so cool. Don't even say you saw Susie at the protest. You know, it's not your place to share other people's participation in protests, in political actions. It's not your place to tell other people. Like somebody comes up and is like, yo, what do you think Susie thinks about, you know, this anti-police movement? None of their business what Susie thinks, and it's certainly not your place to share that information. Don't gossip, don't brag. You never know who, you know, you might brag to, say, your roommate, and maybe you trust your roommate, but then your roommate's girlfriend gets caught up in a court case and she's like, you know what, I have information saying that so-and-so was one of the people that smashed up that cop car. Boom, there you go. You got a court case, all because you gossiped to people you probably shouldn't have. Constantly be aware of what you share and what you leave behind. What digital and physical breadcrumbs do you constantly leave in your life that allow the police and allow political opponents to know who you are, and to really look into, and to share your information, look who's around. Call each other out. If you see people communicating in ways that you think aren't secure, say something. Give an example. That, recently, all kinds of cool stuff was going around in the US. And I was talking on a platform with a friend of mine. I was just like, yo, like, what kind of stuff is going on in your town that you're really interested in? Like, what kind of stuff, like, do you want to get involved in? And they were like, yo, this is not a secure place to ask that. Like, I don't, like, this isn't the kind of place to talk about that. And I was like, oh, fuck, you're right. I totally forgot. And you know what? I felt a little more educated and I moved on. Somebody comes up to you and is like, yo, Susie at the protest the other day, be like, whoa, stop right there. I don't need to know about that. Be willing to catch each other. And that's how you grow and learn and kind of create a culture within your own community of security, is by figuring out where those boundaries are. And as, like, some people are going to know a lot of tech security. Some people are going to be really on top of, the no gossip thing. People are going to have different knowledge bases, and, like, use that to kind of, check each other and create a situation, not of like, oh my God, I can't believe they, like, shared that photo on Facebook. That was so not secure. Like, they're awful. No, be like, hey, so-and-so, I saw you shared that photo on Facebook. You should really take that down. I see multiple exposed faces, and, like, that seems like a really unsafe thing. Talk to each other. Find what feels good. Like, we often in security culture, like, I feel like I've talked a lot about what information do you not want public, but I really actually encourage you to talk about what information do you want public, and assume everything you don't want public should be private and should be kept with an air of secrecy and sense of privacy. All right, I'm almost done, and then I want to hear all of your questions and thoughts. So kind of what's next? I feel like that was a pretty basic 101 on, how our information gets shared and why it is we want to keep it secure. But I want you to go home and I want you to dox yourself. I want you to go home and see how easy is it to find information on who you are. What information is out there about who you are? How do you, what's there? Pretend you're the bad guy. What can you find? Learn new secure technology. I talked about Signal. Learn about VPNs so that your internet usage is a little bit more private. Learn about using DuckDuckGo or Tor instead of Google. Learn about email platforms that work good for your political organizations. Learn different, like, ways to communicate. Explore your convictions. I talk a lot about, like, how do you not be a snitch? Like, how do you prevent yourself from becoming a snitch? Figure out what your convictions are and what lengths you're willing to go to protect your information, but also what lengths you're willing to go to protect others. Read up. I've got a little list here of different court cases I think you should really read up about, and discuss security with others. What does security mean for different people? What does that look like? What are best practices that are most relevant to your organization, to your group, to your friends, and figure out what that looks like. I feel like I had a lot of stories and stuff I was going to share that I didn't, but maybe they'll come up in the questions and comments. But Eric McDavid and Anna, I talked about that a little bit. Rick Wilson, there's a great article in him on The Stranger. He's a great one about informants. He was politically active back WTO era, wasn't ever able to get caught on anything politically related, but they were able to get him on some pretty stupid roundabout drug charges instead. Brandon Darby, he's the one that turned snitch. John Tari, he was a government informant in Tacoma and Seattle back in the day. RNC Welcoming Committee, that's a really interesting court case looking at kind of pretty much doing nothing illegal and still ending up with terrorism charges. They were in the Republican National Convention in Minneapolis in 2008, a group of people who went around being, hey, The Republican National Convention is coming to our town. We think that different radicals and politically minded people should come and express how they feel about the Republicans at this time. We're going to give you guys a space that you can meet in. We're going to give you guys kind of some social networks so you can meet up with each other and do and plan whatever it is you want. But they're not going to, but they themselves, those 8 people, weren't going to engage in any nefarious activities. They simply were there to facilitate. They still got pulled up like off the street in vans and disappeared and charged with terrorism. They were eventually able to beat the charges, but it certainly took years of their life, a lot of money, and a lot of stress. Nothing like being publicly labeled a terrorist. And then the grand jury resistors, who I talked about, KDO, Matt, Duran, and Maddie. Yeah, that's kind of your homework. Whew. All right, I talked a lot. Let's take a moment. I want to figure out how it is I can kind of look at whatever questions you guys have. And if anybody has things that they want to add, more questions, I'd love to hear it. Hey, 350 Seattle, are you able to help me figure out where the questions are? Oh, here's the chat. Never mind.
Yeah, in the chat. Okay.
Okay, so let's see, some questions people had. Can you tell us how to tell which apps follow or listen to us? I recently talked about a rabbit and my phone said, this is the sound of a rabbit. How would you like more information about rabbits? How do I turn that off? Oh my gosh, so it depends on your phone and what's going on. But if you go into notifications or go into settings and you look into like allowances, it usually tells you what apps are allowed to use, like microphone, things like that. If you go into your settings, you should be able to figure it out. That's one thing I didn't talk about too, is it's not just your phone. Like, don't have meetings where you have an Alexa in the room, you know, like don't have Siri listening to you all the time. Like it used to be back in the day, like the cops had to plant bugs. Now we buy them. Rise Up requires invocation codes now. How can we connect with someone who uses the platform to obtain one? That's a great question. See, that's one of those vouching things, right? Where you just kind of have to know people who know people. You used to be able to get invited without invite codes, but also you just might not be able to use Rise Up until you kind of know somebody who does have codes, which is certainly inconvenient and a pain in the butt, but is a really great thing that keeps Rise Up continuing to be secure. Do you have any site research for background checks? So by background checks, I didn't necessarily mean, I mean, you can go to the Washington State Patrol and you can look up somebody's criminal history. But criminal history isn't super interesting. By background checks, I mean doing it informally, talking to your friends. Let's see. Like talking to your friends, talking to trusted people, talking to other organizations, using your social resources to figure out people's backgrounds, but also like do your research. Like I said, like where are these people from? Where did they go to high school? Where did they go to college? Who are their friends? You know, if you have somebody who seems to have no friends, no family, and came out of nowhere, that's definitely like a much more of a red flag than somebody who shows up and they're there with their mom and their daughter, and you know, like you guys happen to go to the same high school as your cousin, and you kind of can get an idea of what their background is. Question, will this be shared with participants? I see it being recorded. That will be a question for 350 Seattle in a minute. Another question, is it worthwhile to leave fake breadcrumbs, i.e. having an alibi, like marking yourself at another location, like Standing Rock? Certainly. I mean, disinformation campaigns have been pretty effective as well. However, I mean, I think sometimes it's a mistake to think that we can like totally outsmart the police and the state, just because we will never have the amount of manpower, the amount of resources, the amount of technology that they have. So I do think that like some big public disinformation campaigns, like marking yourself, you know, at another location, or I think even better when like marking yourself a Standing Rock made you a target, suddenly there was a campaign to just everyone and their grandmother mark themselves a Standing Rock. That way people kind of got lost the needle in the haystack. So I think it's potentially worthwhile, but I think that we have to be careful about making mistakes out of arrogance, thinking that we can like totally outsmart people who have more resources than us. Reducing their jail time by giving information. Absolutely, that's one of the biggest ways that you end up with snitches. Oh, I see. I wrote this prior too. How do you get those court documents saying that they turn state's evidence? Court documents, for the most part, especially after there has been a conviction, are a matter of public record. You just have to request them. I will give, this is an informant, not a state's witness, but how we found out about John J. Towery was that there was a Cop Watch group who routinely did Freedom of Information Act requests about any buzzword that seemed to be related to the activist projects going on in the Puget Sound at that time. And they got all kinds of just stacks and stacks and stacks of boring papers with emails with everything redacted, notes about things. We found all kinds of information, including later on all kinds of notes taken by John J. Towery about kind of what was going on and all of our ideas, including photos of us. It was pretty crazy, but whatever. Side note. We found out that he was an informant because there was this name, John J. Towery, that kept coming up in these documents. And so one of the things that this Cop Watch group did was it just kind of kept files on every name that came up relevant to our anarchist projects. And when enough kind of paperwork came up with this person's name, we started being like, who's John J. Towery? Well, when we Google him and look around and try to find out who he is, it comes up that this person's involved in a motorcycle group. Interesting. We know that somebody named John Jacobs is like also rides motorcycles. Oh, look, next time we see John Jacobs, we take a photo and notice that the license plate frame around his motorcycle connects him to this motorcycle group that doesn't have a John Jacobs, but it has a John J. Towery. Interesting. You know, like how to, and we just started digging and finding more and more information until it was like, wow, we have a lot of paperwork with John J. Towery, and we have a lot of reason to believe that John Jacob is John J. Towery. Now we can publicly go out. Or, you know, there's some, you know, if there's a court case and, you know, there was a, and you think that somebody snitched as part of it, you can have the lawyers of the person who's the defendant request, you know, do a discovery and request that information and see if they have their information in it. You'd be surprised, like if you really want to look into it, you can definitely get court files. Is there a way to anonymously file FOIA requests? Not that I am aware of. It's one of the reasons it was a big Cop Watch project. That person who's involved in Cop Watch kind of decided like, all right, I'm going to be a public name. My name is going to be all over all of this stuff. And that's just going to be kind of my role. And that means that I have to keep my nose clean and I have to make sure that I don't have any other reason for cops to come after me because I am going to be a bit of a public name and a public figure in this. So as far as I know, no. What would be some of your top recommended apps and platforms to use for things like group chatting and emails? As far as texting, Signal is the only one that I can really point to as the like, I really like it. I actually have personally met and know people that I trust who know and trust the person who created Whisper Systems and Signal. So I personally have a little more trust in it, but also I think that it's been really proven trustworthy in the times that it has been subpoenaed. And it's just like super user friendly. It's just like so easy. And you can call, you can group chat, and you can text. Do know though, remember that any group text and any group chat, pretty much any group anything, your information is only as secure as the people involved. If you have a group chat with 20 people and one of those people turns out to be a snitch, everything is now compromised. You know, like you send out a group email, anybody who's on that email chain now has access to, oh, look, these are all the names associated with this project, or at least all the email accounts. So keeping in mind that group chatting has its drawbacks for sure. Emails. So I talked about Thunderbird and Enigmail. I talked about Rise Up. Those are the big ones that I know. I will say I am not a super techie, so there might be other people in this group chat who might be able to share more of that. What other questions, experiences, things do people have that they would like to talk about or share? Oops, I have to find where my chats went. an alternative to Zoom. I know that people have been looking into Jitsi lately, Jitsi. I do not know enough to vouch for it, though I do know that I've asked several friends whose opinion I really trust about internet security, and they said that it's the platform that they use. Generally, things that are open source are going to be a little bit more approved of, and which Jitsi is. However, I cannot give, like, I'll be honest, I'm so new to like Zoom and all of these things that I don't feel like I can tell you for sure because I don't use it very often. Let's see, and I am going to really quick try to share some things via chat that I think y'all should read up on. Cache always as much as possible. Right there, I just posted a really wonderful like security handbook. It's where I got some of the quotes from this, but it's a really good kind of like my talk was a lot more kind of like ideas, things to kind of get you thinking, get you started, kind of, you know, start some rabbit holes. This one's really great for like how-tos, like, okay, you're holding a meeting. What are some ways that I can make that meeting more secure? Okay, like I'm going to do an action. What are some ways? It's like laid out super easy, really kind of wonderful. Let's see. This right here, this is about ethics and security and protest photography. Read it, it's wonderful. Again, you don't need to be, and it's a lot of links to a lot of other things, but you do not need to be a photojournalist to need to know more information about why even just posting a picture on your Facebook is potentially not great. Article about Rick Wilson that I talked about as far as more information on kind of what an informant situation might look like. Yeah, I think you're still seeing my screen, sorry. Those are a few things that I just kind of wanted you guys to follow up and read. Oh yeah, so we talk about cache always. So cache is really like, no one is like using cache anymore. No one's accepting it anywhere, but cache is really wonderful because like it can't be traced, right? Like say you know, we're gonna talk about that banner again. You went to the store, you know, bought the supplies for that banner with your credit card. That now means that, you know, Home Depot knows that you were there. They know what time you were there. They have your name associated with it. Your Discover card now knows that you were at Home Depot at this time and bought X amount. You know, there's just a lot more variables that could potentially be found out, a lot more like breadcrumbs where like you use cache, the only way they can find out that you're at Home Depot at that time is, you know, location tracking, or by going through and reviewing like, you know, days and days worth of footage to see if they see your name. And that's much more labor intensive than most police, you know, detectives are going to do for something like a banner at a protest. Cash to buy, Visa, MasterCard gift cards, and reload with cash. Yeah, that's definitely like, you know, a tactic that you can use if you're doing something. But yeah, as far as in-person stuff, I mean, buying online is not necessarily like more secure because you're still like, and here's my address. But yeah, that is an alternative that creates an extra step and kind of disrupts the flow of information. Let's see. What else? What are some other, trying to make sure there wasn't anything else that I wanted to get on. But I think those are the big ones. I mean, and read up about your history. But of course, I'm telling you to like, go read up, look up all these things, but also make sure that you're using a VPN, use DuckDuckGo, use Tor, like, you know, start kind of investigating ways that you don't just like leave internet trails all over everything. You know, like sharing zines used to be a really cool, wonderful way to share information that didn't leave electronic trails. You know, go back to sharing books, sharing interesting ideas, talking with people in person as soon as COVID allows. You know, find ways to divorce yourself from always needing everything that you do and talk about and think being public. You know, you want to talk about really engaging political action wait till you see your friends. You don't have to tell them right there in that moment, you know? I think that our culture is really because of our information age, is in a really make everything public all the time. But I can tell you right now, you do not want to make anything public. You do not want to share anything electronically that you do not want to read up in your Joint Terrorism Task Force file, that you don't want to hear read before a judge, that you don't want to hear, see posted on a Proud Boy website. Really think about what information do you want out there, and why don't you? Will you be doing another live stream of something like this? I don't have anything planned in the moment, but it's possible as things kind of grow and develop. I would love to see, this kind of a call out to anybody who's watching this that might be a techie. I would love to see complimentary ones, like I would love to see people talk about, specific, like, how to do affinity groups and black blocket protests, or how to do, secure texting and email, like to do kind of like little ones. Cover any cameras on smart devices and not in use. That's actually a great idea. Yes. So many of us have little like Band-Aids that cover our little webcams that are built into our computers. Doesn't really help with the microphone, but that's also just good because there's like freaking creeps out there that know how to like hack in and just turn on your cameras. But yeah, cover any cameras. If you really have to like talk about something and your phone has to be in the room, like put it under the couch cushion and sit on it, like a lot less likely that they're going to be able to like listen in. Can you speak to ways in which movement participants can spread good security culture practices and understanding of the state's repressive capacity and strategy without spreading paranoia and immobilization? Yes, so, right, that's the sweet spot, is awareness without paralyzation. How do we can kind of do that paralysis by analysis, where we overthink everything and we really start to obsess about how much the state is capable of, and then we're just like, well, screw it, they know everything, we can't do anything, and that's awful. No, absolutely do important things, just do it with purpose. Everything that you do your best to do it with intention and with purpose and mindfulness. That's what I'm calling for, is just, maybe take a few slower steps so that you can really soak in all of the variables as you go. But certainly don't let it stop you. Be aware so that you can see the ways in which the state is moving. And this is a call for creativity. Like the stuff that we saw with the pipeline protests, it was pretty amazing to see some of the creativity. Like, for example, the like, oh shit, people are getting, singled out because they checked in at the protests via Facebook. So then people were like, well, shit, my grandma was there too. So was, my friend's dog, who was a Facebook page. Everyone was there. Like, I think that this is just a call for, creativity and conversation. Because the truth is too that police are also really fallible. I can tell you, after the John Tyree case, reading the notes they took was really like interesting. A lot about who was in a relationship with who and how often they got that wrong even was pretty impressive. And that they really aren't all knowing. They really only know what we give them. So just be mindful of what you give them. If you're not giving out all of this information, then like they don't really know that much. They need microphones and cameras. They need snitches, because they don't just automatically know everything all the time. So we're just trying to be aware and trying to just be a little more secure. I hope that answers things a little bit, or kind of like gives a good perspective on that. And I hope that my listing of all the different ways in which you share your location and your information and your politics wasn't overwhelming, but rather just a reason to reflect. Because if nothing else, if we allow our fear of state technology and repression to silence us, then like, well, shit, they won from the start, right? They didn't even have to try. And that is something, is that, the technologies of surveillance, the snitches, everything that they have, we tend to find out about after the fact, because there's been a court case where it's been used against. However, they also publicly release a lot of information, and some of that is to scare us, to maybe make their technology out to be bigger than it is, to make people feel overwhelmed, and to be afraid. So also thinking of the ways in which the media really plays up the state or whomever as a way of just nipping any political repression in the bud. And that itself is problematic. So there's a middle area between all of this that's actually pretty big, and has a lot of really like great creative fun room. Secure devices, phones, is there such a thing? I mean, like I said, burner phones, anything you can take a battery out of. But I don't know. I know of too many court cases where phones were part of the trail of evidence that was used to prosecute people. So I think it's a matter of just not taking our phones and the convenience of them for granted, and being aware of how we use our phones and how we don't need to use our phones. Yeah, I don't have an answer. That doesn't mean there's not an answer. It just means I don't have an answer for the best like secure devices. Like, I don't know if iPhone versus Android, who knows? Oh, also really quick, sorry, just reading over that questions. Somebody asked about how, can you tell us how to tell which apps follow or listen to us? I really encourage all of us. It's really hard. They make them really all legal jargonese for a reason. But every time you accept a terms and condition, I kind of implore you to actually read it. Read what you're signing up for, reading what it allows you to do, reading who they're sharing it with. Too often out of convenience, we're like, sure, I accept it, sure. Can you talk about how to navigate behaviors like unverified rumor spreading and further internal divisions that are common to infiltrators trying to disrupt organizing, but also just common in our culture? Yes, this is hard. So when you hear a rumor, say someone comes to you and they're like, yo, I think John's a snitch. What you can do with that information is you can be like, why? Investigate it. Take that seriously. Don't just let it slide off, and make the person back up what it is they're saying. Help them really, in a really genuine way where you're like, wow, if this person is a snitch, we need to know about this and we need to take it seriously. Or if they're like, well, I don't know, Susie said it, then you can be like, okay, like, and follow it up and be like, Susie, why'd you say that? And also like call each other out. Like I said, like, be like, wow, okay, if you don't have any evidence that they're a snitch, then like you shouldn't be spreading that. And to just educate each other, be like, yo, like that's super like disruptive. Like if you have a very serious concern, I want to hear it. But that kind of gossip, like, is really dangerous. So come to each other really genuinely and really take each other's concerns seriously, and don't allow just offhanded, remarks about things. But also, I mean, this is a can of worms, but also COINTELPRO really used a lot of things like, accusations of misconduct as a way to disrupt organizations into what they call bad jacket people. There's lots of ways. And the biggest thing about rumors, right, is like follow them down, take them seriously. Don't allow people to just spread rumors without having things to back it up. And further internal divisions that are common to infiltrators trying to disrupt organizing. And so I talked about a lot about, infiltrators trying to like up the ante. They can also, by having that like, I'm more radical than thou art, they're both trying to get other people to be increasingly radical so that they commit crimes in their presence. That's one of the biggest ways. But it also divides people, right? Where you're like, oh, well, you're not down enough, and to create divisions between those who might have more hands-on way of expressing their distaste with the status quo from those who want to do more above board forms of organizing, and like creating those divisions. There's kind of a saying about respecting a diversity of tactics, that there's room for both the Martin Luther Kings and the Malcolm X's in a scene. There's room for both the marches and the riots. There's room for all, both the drum circles and the banner drops and the sit-ins, that like we really need to be respecting other people's ways of showing their rage and passion and whatever towards what's going on. And that one of the ways that infiltrators disrupt, but also that we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot, is by creating these strong divisions and by allowing our side to become so fractured and turning against each other. And that also leaves over a lot of room for snitches, because you're like, well, I didn't like that action that they did anyway, so like I don't feel bad snitching on them because they shouldn't have X, Y, and Z. That like by polarizing us and like really moralizing a lot of things, that's one way that they can really disrupt and make it so we don't work together well. So be mindful of those people who are dividing. They might not be snitches or infiltrators, but they might be disrupting, and they might be potentially dangerous because they don't respect other people's forms of rage. Kind of back to Rayshard Brooks's partner, right? People were horrified that this person who is not a person of color would express their rage in a way that like resulted in arson, and like that created a situation where somebody now is like facing like a really serious like sentence. It didn't, like, snitching on that person and having them arrested because everyone was like, expressing their outrage, didn't bring the Wendy's back. It didn't make police any more accountable. It didn't do anything, that worked in the direction that we were trying to work towards as far as Black Lives Matter or, police accountability. All it did was create division and disruption amongst ourselves, and then pretty much do the police's job for them. So I guess that's my answer to your question. The original one is just like, how do we navigate behaviors? Is just take things seriously, and don't let things go unchecked. Did that answer your question, or is there more nuance to that you would like to get my opinion on? Also, one other note with the diversity of tactics is you don't have to like what other people do. And like, you don't have to let people into your circle that you don't like. You don't have to have a really valid reason to be like, I don't want to do a political action with that person. Your gut is enough, or just like, we don't need more people is enough. But that simply not liking somebody does not mean that you need to be against them, that we can have all kinds of diversity of tactics, all kinds of organizations that are working kind of like, in like alongside each other, but not actually working together, and that's totally fine. And that is actually a really interesting way of organizing. This might be an unpopular opinion, but look into the ELF and the ALF, Earth Liberation Front and Animal Liberation Front. That was an interesting exercise in how to do really radical action in a secure way. And that consisted of a bunch of cells from all over the US who knew nothing about each other, but all came together under a single kind of political idea and used the name. It's kind of like the back in the days version of like using the same hashtag in order to come off as this like bigger organization that had this like shared idea. But all of these different cells were so disconnected that even if one group got busted, they didn't know anything about anybody else who was like supposedly connected to the ELF or the ALF, because they were just doing their own thing. They just all had the same ideas that they kind of, joined together under. So that's like a super old school example, and like a little more on like the radical side than a lot of people are probably happy with, but worth looking into as far as like diversity of tactics and how do we kind of work alongside each other, without breaching security, without giving out too much for information, but also without like judging the other groups and what they're doing and like dividing further. All right, I'm gonna allow a couple extra minutes for any last minute questions, but I have been talking for an hour and 40 minutes. I'm sure that folks are getting sick of hearing me. So I would love to hear your voices a little bit more, but if we haven't heard anything more in the next couple of minutes, we'll probably wrap up. But I'm going to put one last little plug in for reading those things I posted up about. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, like I should have started with this, but my big reason for doing this, maybe I did start with it, is like, I'm no expert. I'm not a security tech. I'm not, I don't have any like specialized training, but I simply have a history. I have my lessons learned. I have, I've attended the court cases of loved ones charged with terrorism. I've dealt with informants, like we just have our experiences. And, in 5 or 10 years, some of you who are doing this might be the next folks that are putting on kind of like, hey, these are the lessons we learned from like 2020 that are going to be relevant to you. Continue to share. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to fuck up. Here's a fun little story. First security culture workshop I ever put on, we did all the right things. It was in person, but we had a meeting point that was separate from the room, so the room couldn't be bugged beforehand, like had this whole system. One of the people who helped put it on was actually John J. Towery. So, we're gonna fuck up along the way, even when we try our best. And it's just important that we don't allow the state to scare us into not sharing these stories and to not continuing to share information. We're just going to continue to grow and learn and do our best to keep yourself and each other safe and free and still doing the good work. How would you search for bugs? One of the biggest things, if it's in your home, is just simply like, are things out of place? Does it look like somebody's been in your home? I know that there are devices that can look for the kind of signal the bugs give off wirelessly, although I'm not sure how effective they are this day and age when like literally everything is wireless. But so knowing your space and who has had access to it is one of the first things. So you know whether or not there's even been an opportunity for bugs to be placed. Secondly, yeah, you can look into the different devices that can check for them. I mean, we've all seen them in, crime videos where they just like ping anywhere, where you're like, weird, I don't know why my light switch is giving off a, a signal. Maybe something wireless is going on there. Yeah. So that is how you can check. But again, I have not seen many recent cases involving bugs because we just they're just literally wired into our houses now thanks to smart homes. Although I'm not sure how much tracking devices on cars are a thing, but always be aware of your car and don't be afraid to look under your car occasionally. Make sure no one has put a little magnet with a little tracking device under there. Again, not very common these days, but can't hurt just generally to keep an eye on your car and what's on it. Oh, this is something I didn't talk about earlier, but I totally want to talk about. It's total random side note thing, but DNA testing. Everyone loves doing those I'm an 8th Scottish, I'm a 3rd whatever, DNA test that you can do now. Ancestry.com, 23andMe, so on and so forth. So big corporations are buying up those companies because they have a vested interest in gathering that kind of weird data. But also you just willingly gave over corporations your DNA, and that can be subpoenaed by the police and by the feds. So I don't really advocate for people doing those, especially not doing them on your children who knows what future activities or interesting things they would want to do, or maybe they don't want their DNA on file. And they have not consented to their DNA being in a giant database that might be accessible to other people. So that is a total side note. But yeah, DNA tests, don't love them. DNA is also kind of faulty when it comes to evidence. It's not great. Smart technology and newer cars can also spy on you. Absolutely. Your car is constantly listening to you. Again, convenience is not secure, and security is inconvenient.